We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Derek Lambert, your host. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking to Dr. M. David Litwa about his book, The Evil Creator. It is an absolute must-read. I swear on it, okay? I say this all the time to you guys, like, hey, this is a book you should check out. You should get this book. It is up there at the top, and his writing style is absolutely unique. I enjoyed, even the first two chapters will blow your mind. So highly recommend getting The Evil Creator. M. David Litwa, or Dr. Litwa, if I may. Welcome back to MythVision.
Thanks for having me, Derek. Good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't even really know exactly how to begin this because it's a deep topic, but I feel like the best way to do it is pitch it in a way so people understand why this is a valid and important topic. The first thing we should do, I think, is let everyone know that we are against anything anti-Semitic, okay? Anyone who's against a people groups, you may not agree with a religion, but you know, as far as people, there was a lot of that has happened in history, even before the first century, first century AD and second century AD, there was anti-Semitic writings against the Jews, and we are against that, though we're going to be discussing some of this because that's pertinent to the topic at hand as to how people viewed the God of the Jews and things like that. I had to lay that out there up front as a fair letting everybody know. Also, go ahead, please.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's very important that people who became anti-creator were anti-Judean deity. That doesn't necessarily mean that one should sort of cross a bridge and then make implications about being anti-Jewish. That those are two very different things. Although in antiquity, some people did cross that bridge. Yeah, in the modern period, that is recognized as not right and not ethical. So I appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely. I just want to make sure everybody knows. Also, make sure you get the book. So it's on Amazon. I know it's pricey. I understand that. So does Dr. Litwa. If you can afford it, you won't be let down. This is not his price making. Obviously, the publisher comes up with the prices. And maybe as we continue, the general public starts to purchase more academia works. Maybe they'll wake up and smell the coffee and see that more people are interested in these topics than they have a clue about. Join the Patreon. I have tons of videos. This is just one I just popped up here with Dennis McDonald and Richard Carrier as an example. But I mean, literally hundreds. I probably have like 500 videos that haven't made it onto YouTube that are on the Patreon. Help us out. And then the upcoming Christmas webinar, December the 5th, all day. I might even be hosting that for Dr. Bart D. Ehrman. Did the Christmas story actually happen? Did Jesus, are these completely mythical? Is there any historical kernels? All of that fun stuff. You can get Q&A too. Join and go ask. And if you missed the live, that's fine. You could sign up for the webinar at any point and watch it later on. Go down in the description of this video and you can check it out. So, Dr. Litwa, there's my little upfront little plugs. This picture. What's this picture about?
Well, that is Seth or Set. That's a particular Egyptian deity who has what appears to be an unidentified animal head, but most Greeks in antiquity identified it with the head of a donkey or of an ass, if you prefer. And they borrowed this Egyptian idea that Seth was the evil creator, the Egyptian version of the evil creator. If any of your viewers know Egyptian mythology, Seth is most famous for killing the god of resurrection, who is Osiris, by shutting him up into a giant coffin, sealing it with lead, and letting him starve to death. And then when he found it again, he chopped up Osiris's body and put it in 42 different areas of Egypt. Seth is not a very positive figure. He is god of chaos, associated with red. There's even a good, decent movie out there. I think it's called Gods of Egypt, which portrays Seth pretty well. He is a bad dude. And he's been a god for much longer than Christianity has ever existed. And so the interesting thing when thinking about the evil creator is, although in some respects the evil creator is a Christian idea, or if you prefer, a Gnostic Christian idea, one of the things that's important to recognize is that it has a backstory, and that backstory can be accessed through going into Egyptian mythology, because the Egyptians and the Jews in the Hellenistic period, that is after Alexander the Great and before Caesar Augustus, they got into some conflict. And as some of your viewers know the Exodus story, the Jews like to tell this story. They still do. It's very important for their idea of national consciousness and group identity. But the Egyptians in the Exodus story end up looking very poorly, and Yahweh ends up killing every firstborn Egyptian son, which is a pretty unconscionable act. That's only the culmination of plaguing them with 9 other plagues, including turning the entire Nile into red, thick blood and casting darkness over the earth. And since Seth was also identified with these chaotic elements, like blood, red color, and lack of fertility, drying up elements, war, plague. Since Seth was also associated with those elements in native Egyptian mythology, when Egyptians read Exodus, they intuited that Yahweh, that is the Judean deity, was actually a version of their Seth deity. And so it's no surprise that we come to hear stories told by Greeks and Romans that in the ancient temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem, it wasn't empty. In fact, it was filled with it contained, that is, a particular statue. There's disagreement about the statue. Some said that it was an old man riding on a donkey. Some said that it was a golden image of Yahweh himself with the donkey head, basically Yahweh as Seth. And that's the big secret that the Jews that is, the ancient Jews, didn't want other people to know about, that their deity was actually the Egyptian Seth. And they kept that secret because the high priest only went into the inner sanctum once a year. And when he came out, he told no one what he saw.
There's so much historically as to how this polemic plays. Do you think there's any historical reality to that? Or is this probably completely polemical? So this is a polemic, right?
Yes. Yeah. So stories, myths that people tell about each other can be weaponized. And this is a classic example. So the Egyptians perceived the Jewish Exodus story, as it's now perceived as it's now contained in the Bible, as a weapon against Egyptian culture. So they fought back, right?
Good point.
And they created a weaponized version of their myth. And in their myth, Yahweh was not a good God. He kills people. He plagues people. He strikes people like a monster. And the Egyptians are the ones who have to pay for that. So from the Egyptian perspective, Yahweh is an evil being, a god of chaos who leads his people out of Egypt, yes. But it's because those people were Egyptians themselves and rebelled against the government and were subject to a plague themselves and were actually expelled from Egypt because they were diseased. That's the story of the Exodus that the anti-Judean Egyptians told. So
Like
neither the
Manetho.
sorry,
Like Manetho.
like Manetho, like other figures, and if you read Josephus, whom I'm sure many of your readers are or your viewers are familiar with, if you read Josephus, he writes that tract against Apion. Apion, named after the Apis bull, is an Egyptian man who wrote some anti-Judean literature in the first century, that is right around the time of Jesus. And at the end of the first century, Josephus takes him to task. And in the course of doing that, Josephus reveals that there was a huge, long-lasting Egyptian animus and a mythology against the Judeans. And part of that mythology was that the god Yahweh was an evil god with an ass head who was god of chaos.
Okay, so this also goes to Antiochus Epiphanes. If I'm not mistaken, he ends up conquering Judea. He conquers the temple. And supposedly the story goes that he sacrifices a pig on the altar to defile. This was the abomination of desolation, so to speak, that we see place in Daniel. Is there any polemic there? Even Daniel seems to be familiar with of Antiochus and his abuse of the Jerusalem temple. Do you think?
It's actually the way that the stories go. It's actually not Antiochus IV, but
Okay.
A later ruler, also called Antiochus, later ruler of Syria, who breaks into the Jerusalem and wants to get inside the temple. And this is a theme as stories are told and retold. The same story is actually told, incidentally, of the Roman ruler Pompey the Great, who is another person who took over Jerusalem. They all seem to want to get into the sort of quote unquote holy of holies, and they are all told politely, no, sorry, you can't get in there. And this is what raised this incredible curiosity among the Romans and the Greeks. Like, well, what do you got in there? I mean, why can't we see it? I mean, our temples are public. You can come in. The Parthenon, you can come in and see the statue that we have inside. It's a 10-meter statue or a 40-foot statue of Athena, and we've got nothing to hide. So what are you guys hiding? And this all created a lot of conspiracy theories in the ancient world that the Judean leadership doesn't want any non-Jew, in fact, not only non-Jews, but anyone who's not of the elite to actually enter and see what's inside the Holy of Holies. And so the conspiracy was that the inner sanctum of the Jews was actually not empty, that it had a statue there. And that statue was the statue of Seth.
Interesting. Yeah, there's so much here you wrote in your book. And I really, really enjoy, you talk about how Suetonius or Tacitus is mentioning this as well. He's still ripping on this theme. And we're right around the Josephus period, right? Into the first century time. This whole notion begs us to get into the New Testament text. This is the reason I wanted us to start with that. Many Christians believe, and I thought this as well, that anything that was not on the path of orthodoxy corrupted what was actually true. So the text of the Bible, when I was Protestant, this is much further down the line, but either way, the Bible is the standard. We were taught that the understanding of it by the Orthodox Church, Trinitarian, the idea about Jesus, etc., was true, and that all of these groups, what we call Gnostics, these people who are heretics, the people who did not see Jesus as divine, etc., they were purposely protesting against the facts that the text teaches. In this book, you're actually going, no, actually, there is precedence within the New Testament if we actually take what it's saying and see that that's what's going on, which we touched on last time. You are of the father of the devil, and this is the God of the Jews. Or your father is the father of the devil, something to that effect. So with that being in mind, I did want to mention one more thing, and I want to pitch it to you. Me and my buddy Neil from Gnostic Informant, I told him some of this stuff, and we were getting into the text, and I said, I wonder, because I've had Rabbi Tovia Singer, I've had other scholars on who talk about the New Testament being loaded with anti-Semitism. It wasn't just one book. Even Elaine Pagels comes on, and she even is going into Matthew thinking it's there as well, not just John, which we'd go, but that's the most Jewish gospel. But this is where it gets really interesting. If the ass argument is something that is polemical, probably from Gentiles of some sort, and Gentiles are entering the church around the time this literature is showing up, is it possible to you that Jesus riding on an ass into the city that's going to be destroyed, Jerusalem, is potentially this kind of imagery that you have the rider of the donkey into the city, which they're going to deny him and he's going to destroy them? Could that be something there potentially?
Well, that's a good question. It's sort of like an allegorical reading, though, right? Because it's like the gospel writers would have had to know that this was a symbol of Seth, and that they then were kind of cheeky and creative in putting Jesus on a symbol of Seth, and then having him be brought into Jerusalem as sort of like the great transgressor of Judaism. I would be wary of that reading because, I mean, I think, yeah. So those who would see the donkey as an image of Seth would be Greek and Roman writers who are familiar with Egyptian culture. And where I would direct the question is, if we're interested in this kind of symbology, then we need to focus on Egypt specifically and the city of Alexandria. That is an area where Christians, we know, like when they spread through to Rome and to other areas, we know that they were in Alexandria first. So, because Alexandria is, a lot closer to Jerusalem than Rome is. But the interesting thing about earliest Alexandrian Christianity is it's a completely dark period, meaning that, as the famous German historian Walter Bauer said, somebody in later church history didn't want people to know what early Christians were doing in Alexandria. The very first Christian theologians we know in Alexandria have all been de-Christianized and called Gnostic. Their names are Valentinus, Basilides, and Carpocrates, all of them early 2nd century. They are not the beginning of a tradition. They are the end point of something that began in Alexandria. When the form of Christianity, and remember, there's no creeds, there's no councils, there's no priests at this point. There's only house churches and individual leaders. So the question would then be focused on, well, could a reader of the Gospels that might have been written in Syria or Rome, but when they get to Alexandria, could they have made that connection because they are much more informed by Egyptian culture? Possibly. We don't have any attestation of symbolic readings of that donkey as Seth, but that would certainly be interesting. And Jesus, I think what we need to be aware of is that the image of Yahweh as Seth is probably conceived to be called anti-Semitic. And so we'd need to be very careful in saying that we'd need proof that this was another instance of Christian anti-Semitism. Right. And we just need data and evidence in the ancient world to make that case.
Right. We can make guesses all day long and interpretations. However, you're looking for historical precedents for that kind of interpretation, and you haven't found any that we know.
No. I think early Christians were, especially in Egypt, were well aware of the traditions of Yahweh actually his secret identity being Seth. And that's where that was an influence in early Christian theories of the evil creator. Because some early Christians, later demonized and called Gnostics, did view the Judean creator as an evil being. And then the big question is, well, how do you get from point A to point B? Because a bunch of other Christians in other areas are just assuming that the Judean deity is the Christian high god, that Yahweh is just the dude that's in charge. But then other Christians are saying, no, 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 no. There's a God of Jesus Christ, whom he talked about, and then there's a Judean deity who's local, who's always been local, always been the sort of protector of Israel as a nation. But there's a God beyond God, and that's the God of Jesus Christ. That's the God we worship. That's the universal God. And then the next step is actually the Judean God. He sort of looks like an idiot. Some people said that. Some people said he was just. Some Christians said that, well, he's a just God, but he's not a nice one. He's not kind. Right? He's not loving like the God of Jesus Christ. And then some Christians took it even a step further and said, you know what? He's outright evil.
So is it possible that the catalyst of 70 AD plays a significant role in this divide? Imagine Jews, getting what happens in 70 AD. Like, where's your God at? And obviously, because they're monotheists, they have to explain why their God did this. And it's their sin, the punishing just wrath of their God upon themselves. And of course, Christians say it's due to you neglecting and rejecting Jesus. So is there early discussion about this? What happened in 70 AD is this evil creator did this to you? Does that play any role?
Well, that's an excellent question, because a lot of people view the evil creator as so radical that they say, well, this has to be based on real social experiences. And the fact is, when you look at Jewish history in the period between 66 and 135, it's a terrible time to be Jewish in the Greco-Roman world. You have a big rebellion in Judea beginning in 66. It ends up with the temple being torched. It doesn't end until 73. It's an immense war, years and years long, that totally decimates the Jews, and could easily be interpreted as a complete and utter failure of the Jewish deity to protect his own people against the sort of godless enemy, in this case, the Romans. But that's not it. In terms of Jewish history, there's a huge diaspora revolt that is a revolt that actually begins in Cyrene, which is in North Africa. It goes over to Alexandria in Egypt. And this happens in between 115 and 117. And this ends up in basically a sort of a Holocaust for the Jews in Egypt. Because the Emperor Trajan sends out his best generals and basically just kills Jews left and right. And so the Jews who had lived in Alexandria, and we think that they were sizable population, 100,000 people, were all butchered at this period. And then in 132, we have a second Judean revolt, and this one is also cruelly, devastatingly put down. So it's a bad period for Jews and Judeans, and easily one could say, geez, their God is not doing it for them. I think the Greco-Roman reaction would be, on one level, the Jewish deity is weak, or the typical reaction for insiders is to say, we humans, that is, must have done something wrong. But then there's also that other option. Actually, the God we worship is evil, and he's been tricking us this whole time, because he's been trying to convince us that we're going to rule the world, that we're going to defeat our enemies, that we're going to live in peace and paradise right here with the world capital in Jerusalem. And that never happened. It's just it's like a pipe dream. So you could imagine some people as saying, enough is enough. Some Jews and Christians saying, enough is enough. This God isn't really God. He's evil. And that's a possibility.
Do you think that the Apostle Paul is working off of this polemic, this issue, because Gnostics later claim, and this may just be a total disconnect, they want to have apostolic succession from Paul, whereas others have the apostolic succession from Peter. Is all of that later embellishment, or do you think the Apostle Paul out the gate might be tapping into this polemic, this issue between Jew and Gentile, and that here he sees this God potentially as an evil creator? I don't know, because he's not a very big fan of the laws, it seems. And it just depends on how you're looking at Paul. So I guess I'm asking you also, you must not be a big fan of, based on what I've been reading, like probably not a big fan of Paul within Judaism school of thought. You're probably more akin to Paul seems to be doing an elbow against the law. What are your thoughts? I just threw you a bunch of stuff to hope something sticks in all of that.
No, I mean, I agree with the mainstream views that Paul was a Jew and considered himself a Jew. And since he dies in the early 60s, he doesn't experience any of the horrors of the Jewish war and this 60-year period of great suffering for the Jews between, say, 70 and 135. He doesn't see any of that. So he's not perceiving any of that and is not influenced by any of that. I think in his own time, a so-called mainstream Jew would view Paul as a renegade, as someone who was basically had excommunicated himself from Judaism because of his attitude toward Torah and to Torah obedience. And so from their perspective, he was a transgressor. And Paul says himself that he got his butt whipped, 5 times he was basically whipped in synagogue situations, received 39 lashes. So we can tell that, Jews of his day are not perceiving him as a particularly good Jew, but there's no question that he was a Jew. And if modern scholars want to emphasize that Jewish element, that's fine. But there's also the obvious, I think, point that Paul, because of his attitude toward the law, makes possible a new vision of a religion which can now detach itself from the sort of mother religion, if you please, and that is what allows for a tremendous influx of Gentiles. That's not anti-Jewish, but Paul does say some pretty strange things sometimes. For instance, in Galatians 3:19, he seems to indicate that the law wasn't mediated directly from God, but was mediated by angels, which means that the law really probably isn't the word of God. It's spoken by angels who, I don't know, we don't have any reason to think that they're evil, but it's not like the final revelation. And some angels actually can be evil. So occasionally Paul seems to, he's definitely pushing a certain envelope. And then people reading Paul, who are fully Gentile, like Marcion, who is the major sort of thinker in part 2 of the evil creator, they then say that, and they, Marcion grew up in Pontus, which is in north central Turkey. Marcion had no real probably connection to Judaism that we know of. And so he had no love or loyalty toward the Jewish or Judean deity. He didn't grow up thinking that the Judean deity was his deity. He didn't think that the Judean deity, he didn't owe him anything. He wasn't raised in Torah. He wasn't raised in Jewish traditions. So when he finally got to reading the Old Testament, it's similar to like, an American today who never went to church, never went to synagogue, and who at age 30 just picked up the Old Testament and started reading. And it's like, who the heck is this deity? I mean, it's sort of like a fresh experience. And then saying like, well, geez, this deity is claiming to be the only God, but he's actually a monster, sort of like that kind of a reading. and that seems to be what's going on.
Wow. Yeah, that's I could imagine running across some of the things that you would in your first run with the Bible or with the Hebrew Bible. You would probably think that, unless you were an Israelite and you were thinking somehow you were able to blame yourself every time, and that's what they did. The Phibionite, and you talk about this birth of Mary, or the secret gospel of Mary as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the Phibionite? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, Phibionites are, we know about them from Epiphanius, who's writing, a heresiologist writing in the late 4th century. And he says that this particular group of Christians in Egypt, who were at one time integrated into the Catholic Church at that time, they had a text called the Birth of Mary. And in that text, which we think predated the Phibionite use of it, but in that text, the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, and there's incense all around, and it's kind of hard to see. And but he gets in there, and all of a sudden, a vision of a god appears to him out of the mist, and it's Yahweh, but Yahweh actually has a donkey head. And so the high priest is absolutely terrified. I mean, it surprises him. It's not like he was an insider into, I mean, he's like, holy smokes, I'm providing smoke for a donkey god. And so he runs out and wants to tell the worshipers on the outside, what are you worshiping? This is crazy. But the donkey god sort of takes vengeance and seals his lips, as it were.
And just so everyone knows, Zechariah is actually the father of John the Baptist in this narrative. He's the high priest, right?
Well, that's the background tradition.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, where this particular high priest is not named, but yeah, okay. you could view it as Zechariah.
Okay.
Eventually, he gets his tongue untied, and he says, and there's a bunch of people outside, and he's like, "What are you worshiping? There inside, I saw a donkey god, and that's totally inappropriate for worship." And the people are so stunned by this. Instead of convincing them, they gather stones in the temple court and just start chucking them at the high priest, and he dies in agony and in the floor of the temple court. And so it's a story. It's obviously a polemical myth, and it's a story written by someone who's obviously anti-Judean. And he wants to say, or she wants to say, these Judeans who are worshiping the Jewish God, first of all, they don't know what they're worshiping. He's really an ass god. Mm-hmm. Second, even if you told them that really they were worshiping Seth, the ass god, they wouldn't accept it. They'd try to kill you. And so this is the writer of this story is definitely a Christian, and the content of this story is about the birth of Mary. That is probably, in this case, the mother of Jesus.
That's right.
But in this story is also this other story about the Jewish deity being a donkey god. And that's all we know, because the gospel, or the birth of Mary as a text itself, doesn't survive for obvious reasons, as you can imagine. I mean,
yeah, I wouldn't keep it if I was a Christian either.
Well, later Orthodox Christians, who identified Yahweh as the Christian God,
right,
would not have been pleased at all by this.
If I may show an image that you have, this one in particular is an image what appears to be a being on a cross with a donkey head, and a faithful worshiper, it seems, at the bottom of this cross. This seems to be depicting Jesus, whereas Jesus is actually born, and this is part of the polemic, it seems, throughout some of this literature. Jesus is born of a donkey god, sleeps with his mother, and here is the offspring of a donkey god, a man with a donkey head. It's really like if we were doing stand-up, let's say, it would be funny to like hear this in like Mad TV or something like that. But the crap that was produced from this, the hatred that came from this kind of stuff, there's some real blood, sweat, and tears that go into this. At the end of the day, it's kind of goofy looking back, like, what in the world were people doing, man? Because I don't personally believe any of it, but it's like, whoa, people were killing each other over like these different things. But anyway, did you want to comment on this donkey?
Well, so that particular picture is called the Alexamenos Graffito, and that was found in Rome. And you can go, you can actually go to Rome, and you are around there, around the area of the Palatine Hill. On one side of it, the side that faces the ancient race course, which still kind of survives, not the stone of it. There was a room, and it was plastered, and they found this graffiti, which someone had scrawled into it with a sharp instrument, and it was a picture of a donkey god on a cross, with a picture of a worshiper, which, and on the bottom was written Alexamenos, who's a guy we don't know, but Alexamenos worships God. And it's apparently making fun of this guy named Alexamenos, who is apparently a Christian. And that's one of our earliest representations of Jesus on the cross, is actually the guy with the donkey head. I wouldn't say anybody died over this image, but it was sort of like it was definitely both an anti-Jewish and at this point, obviously, an anti-Christian slur, concocted by Greeks and Romans. We're very familiar with this. And since in Greco-Roman culture, the donkey was, this is not true for Egyptians, but for Greeks and Romans, since the donkey was a symbol of stupidity, they were basically saying, wow, the Christian God is really, really stupid. He gets his butt crucified, and there you go. And anybody who worships him is as dumb as an ass.
Wow.
So it carries a punch, certainly.
Yeah, it does. Oh my gosh, that was intense. Okay, I had this question for you, and there's so many more, right? Like Seth seems to be a donkey deity, or could be the face of a donkey or a pig. Either way, kind of up for dispute on what the face is actually, but either way, it's one or the other, it seems. The question I had was this: we have these different versions of Gnostics, if you can use that with lowercase g, with different ideas about God. But what gets me is they look at things like Marcion. I'm going to just call him like a proto-Gnostic or some form of it. Let's just say we throw him in the bag. He sees this, and it's not like he divorces himself completely ontologically. He still believes that this God, though evil, or just, however you want to put it, is absolutely still the creator. Yet the God of Jesus is not the same God, and that God is love, which I'm glad he has at least a nice God he's looking at. But at the end of the day, I asked you, I was like, Dr. Litwa, why did they still believe that package to get like all together? Why didn't they completely divorce it to the point where, look, we don't believe anything that this is saying in the Hebrew scriptures. We believe purely in the God that Jesus is bringing to the table. Is it because there was so much connection between Jesus fulfilling things that are in this older literature that they had to keep it? Or what are your thoughts?
Well, what we call today the Hebrew Bible was in the Greek version called the Septuagint, and that was the first Bible of most early Christians. So, not all of them, but a good many of them. So it wasn't something that you just throw out. It was something that you had to take seriously, And there were prophecies. And in early Christianity, one of the things that really made people Christians was that they thought that the prophecies spoken in the Septuagint came true in Jesus. Some people still today believe that. It's generally not the first argument that apologists make, but it's still made today. The prophecies of the so-called Old Testament are proved true in Jesus Christ, at least in Christian eyes, and that was a proof of the truth of Christianity. So this was important material. Marcion, again, I don't think that I don't know if he grew up familiar with stories from the Septuagint or not, but when he definitely didn't have any love or loyalty for the Jewish deity. So when he read this material, he wasn't at liberty simply to reject it. He did think that it was true. Much of the Hebrew Bible contains what was thought of as history. So it's not like you could just reject Israelite history. No, I mean, it happened in some sense. So you have to take it seriously. But some of these thinkers, like Saturninus, who's an early Christian from Antioch, had the theory that, one of the reasons that a lot of the stuff in the Hebrew Bible is true is because angels revealed it. And this theory goes back to Paul. But these angels were actually evil and trying to fool people. In other words, an angel told something that ended up being true, but really it's the basis of the religion is so the revelations that come true are due to superhuman agency, but the whole package itself is a pack of lies. And those who believe it because they've been fooled by these lower divine beings, one of whom happens to be the Judean God himself. And we can tell he's one of these lower divine beings because he's so hungry for his own worship and he's desperate to assert himself. And he just seems like a monstrous narcissist. And that's a very good indication that that's not a real deity.
The Phibionite have a 7-layered heaven, and they attributed a certain planetary, if you will, celestial body to the particular deity's name or angel's name. And one of those bodies, I think it's the third or fourth one you were saying in your book, is actually attributed to the god, this creator god, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So, yes. Usually the Jewish god is identified with Saturn. That is the outer ring. The Greeks didn't have Uranus. They certainly didn't have Pluto.
Right.
And so their planetary scheme ended with Saturn, or what the Greeks called Kronos. And some early Christian thinkers identified the Jewish deity with this god on the outer rim of the universe called Saturn. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I thought it was third or fourth, so it's the seventh. Interesting. Let's because there's so much you go into in this book. I'd like to ask you one more question. I'm point blank gonna put you on the spot to get what I can out of you, and I ask that with this in mind. Some things we can't be dogmatic about, and we can't have absolute high confidence in what we think, but maybe go out on a limb and guess and give your hunch on some of this stuff. This is my opinion. You clearly indicate John seems to be better understood as the father of the devil, and that the Jewish God is, this is the polemic. The Jewish God is evil. He is the father of Satan, and he does Satan does like him, is a liar from the beginning and a murderer. And it goes right back to Genesis. This is in our New Testaments today, even with our English translations trying to kind of make that sound like, not what you're saying it says in Greek and what other scholars have said it says in Greek, where it's clearly a jab at the Jews and their God. Is there anywhere else in the New Testament that you would say, I'm specifically maybe mentioning Matthew or Pauline literature, where you clearly see something like this as well? Is there something like that red flags to you that's major?
Well, so in part 2 of the book, I go through all of the passages of the New Testament that Marcion dealt with. And I've talked about, in a previous session, I've talked about 2 Corinthians 4:4, which says that the God of this world has blinded people from seeing the light of the truth of Christ. And the God of this world being taken as a reference to the Creator. And that's a logical reading. It's not a reading taken by many Christians today, but it's a logical reading because who else would the God of this world be but the Creator? And who else would the Creator be but the Judean deity? And we know from Isaiah chapter 6 and many other passages of the Old Testament that the Judean deity, Yahweh, blinds people from seeing truth. And any God that blinds people from seeing truth is simply a monster, not a God at all. So that's a Marcionite reading. Marcion also paid very particular attention to something which, again, goes against the trend of modern Jesus studies. Marcion paid attention to the place where Jesus destroyed the Jewish law, Jesus himself. And Marcion, of course, wasn't interested in what we call the historian's Jesus or the historical Jesus. He was interested in the Jesus of the Gospels, and he just could point by point, just go through and say, here's where he broke the Sabbath. Here's where he disobeyed food laws. Here's where he shouldn't have touched a leper. Here's where he did X. Here's where he did Y. All this is against Jewish law. And then Jesus ends up dying. Why does he end up dying? Well, from the Jewish perspective, it's because he disobeys Jewish law. He's viewed as a transgressor. But who's the author of Jewish law? Well, again, for the Jews, it's God, or their God, Yahweh, who spoke the Jewish law supposedly on Mount Sinai. So Jesus transgresses the law of the Jewish God. If he transgresses the law of the Jewish God, he must think that the law of the Jewish God is on some level wrong. And who's going to be pissed off by that? The Jewish God. So the question is, how does Jesus die? Well, from the Jewish perspective, that is in the Gospels, he dies as a transgressor of the law. He dies as a rebel against the author of the law, God himself, Yahweh. And Yahweh takes vengeance. And the thought is that he kills Jesus himself, or orchestrates the events which end up in the death of Jesus. And further proof of this comes from Galatians, where Paul says that Jesus was cursed by the Jewish deity on the cross. And if you go read this passage that Paul cites from Deuteronomy, it says that Yahweh curses anybody and everybody who is placed on a cross, which would include Jesus. So if Yahweh is in the business of cursing Jesus, then first of all, you have to think about it. Does a God curse people? No. Second, if Yahweh is cursing Jesus, is he really Jesus's father? Probably not. So he must be an evil being who crucified Jesus and cursed him to boot. And if you believe that, well, then you can't believe that the Judean deity is the father of Jesus Christ, who is also a good being. You simply can't. It's not logical anymore. And if you think that this deity, Yahweh, put Jesus on the cross, well then, I mean, that's like the worst thing in the Christian imagination, you know? I mean, you can't get any worse than killing Jesus. I mean, there was a joke about a guy who shot John Paul II, the Pope. You know, I mean, it's like the fastest ticket to hell. You want to shoot the Pope, but killing Jesus, but that's just, if any sin is unforgivable, it's that. But that's what Yahweh does, and curses him. So it's impossible from that theological reconstruction to view Yahweh as the God of Jesus. He is the enemy of Jesus, and Jesus is his enemy because he breaks his law. And I know that, you know, your listeners who might be, you know, reading modern scholarship, and I know you've had Matt Thiessen on, who wants to say that, no, Jesus, you know, obeyed the law.
Mhm.
Well, I disagree. I don't think he did. I think he was a transgressor. And I think that very early Jews viewed most Christians as transgressors of Jewish law. And most Christians never had any interest in obeying Jewish law. They never did kosher. They never washed their hands. They never even did any of that stuff. All of that was foreign, thanks to Paul. So, yeah, Christianity as a religion is a transgression of Judaism. And so that's how it gets to be a separate religion. It's just so far beyond the pale. It has to be excluded.
Okay, back to the God of this world. So we see this in Ephesians too, but we also see this in the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus is in the wilderness to be tempted. And this is kind of maybe, I'm saying maybe, jabbing into what you're talking about here. And there's three temptations. We see the mimesis. It's definitely connecting to the Moses narrative that Jesus is a new, better Moses, if you will. Maybe polemically saying he's better than Moses. Moses was nothing compared to Jesus. That might be the intention. I don't know. But the point is, he's tempted with three temptations by Satan himself. And this is really interesting. He offers him the kingdoms of this world. So here, who has control of the world? Well, God created the world. He's in really control of the world. Who is Satan? God's pit bull. We see it throughout the Hebrew scriptures. Satan does what God tells him to do. He's tempting him and telling him, you can have all these things. And he is rejecting the world. He's rejecting the offer of the nations of the world, or these kingdoms, if you will, whatever's being described here in Matthew. And of course, he passes this test of rejecting bread, having his angels, concerning him from falling. Like, hey, don't worry, the angels will take care of that. He's like, nah, I'm good on the angel thing. I'm not jumping off this thing. And then, of course, the kingdoms of heaven. Do you think the kingdoms of the earth? I mean, do you think that there is something here in the vein of what you're talking about?
Well, it is one of those. It's one of those cases of cognitive dissonance in early Christian theology, where some texts, including 1 John, which says that the devil sort of has sway over the whole world, and as you know, in the Synoptic Gospels, where the devil has access to all the kingdoms of the world and is in charge. He seems to be controlling the world. Some people think the God of this world is the devil in 2 Corinthians 4:4. He's a being of tremendous power in all of those reconstructions. And he seems to be basically taking over, yes, the province of the creator, because no one should have that kind of power over the world except the creator himself.
Mm-hmm.
So one could see Marcion and others perhaps leaning in that direction. In terms of that specific passage in Matthew, I didn't find evidence of them using that in the way that you're talking about. But part of that is also because Marcion doesn't think that Matthew even is a gospel.
That's right.
He doesn't accept that one. So this one that is upheld as, the most Jewish of all gospels, well, it doesn't matter because many early Christians didn't view it as scripture. So again, we're looking at it always anachronistically from the 4th century, when the big four were finally set in stone.
Right.
That wasn't the case for Marcion and these other thinkers.
All I can say at the end of this whole talk is that I have more questions than answers. I mean, I'm fascinated with your work, what you're doing. I hope everybody goes, absolutely get the book. I can't recommend it enough for anybody who's interested in checking it out. The Evil Creator, M. David Litwa. Dr. Litwa is blowing my mind. I'm not even done. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, what do we not understand What are we missing? What kind of Frankenstein is happening here? And, makes me think the diatessaron, that's so late in the game. Like, they're obviously trying to fix a problem. There's a problem. Something's wrong. And I just want more people to take the time to read it. Get the book if you can get it. Be sure to do that. That's all I can do. That's all I can do. Seriously, thank you for your time. We haven't even gotten past the first 2 chapters, by the way. So,
well, I'm happy to come back if you have any more detailed questions. That's always a possibility. I know it just depends also on the interests of your viewers. And yeah, my hope is that this book, which, as in many academic books, takes years of research, and I'm really hoping that that it can be useful and helpful for everybody who is interested in sort of the dark side of Christian theology, as it were, the forgotten parts of it that need to be brought back into the light and used responsibly, of course. It's one thing to conclude in your own personal theology that the God described in the Bible, that's not a good being. So one could go in various directions from there. One could go in the direction of atheism, or one could go into the direction that these early Christians did, which is to view conceive of a God beyond the God of these particular scriptures, and perhaps all scriptures, to have access to something that's beyond knowledge. Because the God, if there is God, is, as the Gospel of John says, no one has seen or known him, and he's not even a him. You can go in any direction you please. But I think it's really important to have a serious, non-apologetic view of the Christian God, and make careful decisions, because this has to do with our image of God. We tend to create ourselves in the image of the God that we have, and if your God is out there killing people, then or commanding genocide, or sending a flood, or whatnot, or blinding people, then you might wake up someday doing the same thing.
Geez, you make me want to ask more questions about people born blind in the New Testament. What's going on here? Like, there's just so many things to ask, because they weren't born because of their sin. It must be God. It makes you think the author might be seeing these things. So there's not only this, ladies and gentlemen, please leave a comment specifically praising the work, praising the episode, letting us know if you want to do this again, because Dr. Litwa has many other books. I want to interview him on all of them. I want to get into all this material, and it's a matter of what you think about it and how you feel. Please let us know what you think. And until next time, thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Litwa.
Thank you, Derek. Really enjoyed it.
Never forget, the God above God likes this chant. We are MythVision.